Brigadier General Robert Travis peered through the B-7's windshield as his formation began to fall apart. 30 German fighters, perhaps more, dove in from every direction. A wave of interceptors started cutting down the unprotected bombers one after another. The mission was supposed to soften up defenses ahead of D-Day, but foul weather had betrayed them and scattered their escort. Out of the clouds came a single Mustang. The general felt his hopes sink. One fighter couldn't possibly save the group, yet the Mustang didn't turn away. It met the enemy head-on. Travis could hardly believe what he saw. As he later put it was one lone American against what seemed like the entire Luftwaffe. James Howard didn't set out seeking thrills. Adventure seized him instead. Born on April 8, 1913 in Canton, China, he grew up amid cultural clashes and colonial ambitions. His father, an American ophthalmologist, had crossed the Pacific to teach eye surgery in a bustling, tense, changing port city. When Howard was 11, his life was thrown into terror. Manurian bandits swept the area and kidnapped him and his father, dragging them into lawless hills. For 10 weeks they remained captives, watched, threatened, and marched through harsh country with no promise of rescue. They eventually escaped. The full story was never told, but the experience left a lasting mark. The boy who survived had learned to remain composed when others could not. The family moved back to St. Louis in 1927. Howard had intended to follow his father's path into medicine, but flying, its danger, its command, its sense of mastery, awakened a different appetite. In late 1937, he applied to the U.S. Navy's flight training program, one of the most selective routes a young man could take. He passed written exams in math, physics, and navigation, then endured a battery of physical tests for eyesight, reflexes, and coordination. Of 140 applicants, only 15 were chosen. Howard was among them. By January 1938, he was at Naval Air Station Pensacola, learning in open cockpit trainers. He earned his wings in 1939 and was posted to fly the F-3F biplane fighters from USS Enterprise, based at Pearl Harbor. The F-3F-2 was the Navy's last biplane fighter, rugged, underpowered, and built like a barrel with wings. With a 950 horsepower radial engine and a top speed barely above 250 mph, it was already outdated by European measures, yet it climbed quickly, rolled tightly, and could take punishment. It taught Howard discipline, patience, and how to think in 3 dimensions without technological aids. Meanwhile, trouble gathered across the Pacific. By June 1941, Howard made a choice that many Navy flyers thought reckless. He resigned his commission and signed up for a far more hazardous venture. The American volunteer group, the legendary Flying Tigers, operating in Burma under Claire Lee Chennault, the outspoken strategist who had warned about Japan's air threat, while few in Washington listened. For Howard, the move felt natural. China was a second home. Where others saw the AVG as a risky escapade, he saw an opportunity to defend a country he truly cared about. The Flying Tigers flew Curtiss-Wright P-40 Warhawks. The P-40 was a brutal, unforgiving fighter full of contradictions. Its Allison V-1710 engine gave solid power, and its .50 caliber guns struck hard. It couldn't outclimb the nimble Japanese fighters or dominate at high altitude, but it could dive like a falling anvil and shrug off damage that would ruin other planes. Pilots who mastered its quirks turned weaknesses into advantages and survived to tell the tale. Howard joined the 2nd Squadron, the Panda Bears, and quickly caught Chennault's eye. The commander had crafted tactics to play to the P-40's strengths while reducing its liabilities. Rather than trade turns in close dogfights with more agile Japanese fighters, the Tigers used hit-and-run assaults, diving from altitude to strike, then using speed to break away. Howard's rise from pilot to squadron commander and then group operations officer was not political. It was earned through skill, sharp instincts, and absolute mastery in the air. The true proving ground came on January 3, 1942, when Howard took part in a bold raid on a Japanese-held airfield in Thailand. The mission required low-level strafing, among the most perilous of flying tasks. As he dove his P-40 toward the field, Howard saw 3 Nakajima Ki-27s lined up. The Ki-27 was Japan's main army fighter, Light, highly maneuverable, able to outclimb and outturn most Allied types. On the ground, though, they were just aluminum and fuel waiting to burn. Howard came in low with throttle wide open and aimed at the three parked Ki-27s. He opened fire. 50 caliber rounds tore into the first, engulfing it in flames. He swept the second and third, rupturing fuel tanks and shattering canopies. All three ignited instantly. Then the ground exploded. Tracer rounds zipped past as Japanese gunners opened up. A shell struck his wing root, jolting the P-40 and making the controls stiff. Howard yanked the stick, hauled the Warhawk up steeply, and banked toward the south. The plane trembled all the way home, but it held together. More triumphs came quickly. Howard shared credit for a Mitsubishi Ki-21 bomber on January 19th, scored a solo kill against another Ki-27 over Rangoon on January 24th, then shot down his last Ki-27 over Hang on July 4, 1942, during the Flying Tiger's final combat operation. After 56 missions and 6 confirmed victories, James Howard had earned a reputation he wryly labeled in his memoir as an arbitrary title, which is supposed to distinguish a fighter pilot who had achieved a high level of success. Late in 1942, the Navy offered Howard a chance to rejoin, but an encounter with a curt base commander made it clear he no longer fit their ranks. Within days, he made the switch official, surrendering his Navy wings for a captain's commission in the U.S. Army Air Forces. Stateside, he flew 2 very different fighters defending the West Coast, the Lockheed P-38 Lightning and the Republic P-47 Thunderbolt. The P-38 looked like something from tomorrow, with twin booms, a central nacelle, and tricycle landing gear powered by 2 Allison engines. It promised outstanding performance, though the promise often fell short. Howard later recalled, "There were so many problems with the P-38. It was cynically called the engineer's dream as opposed to a pilot's dream. Its mechanical complexity worked against it. Twin engines demanded perfect synchronization. Turbo superchargers were temperamental, and peculiar handling traits required constant attention. For a pilot used to the straightforward honesty of single-engine planes, the P-38 felt like flying a compromise. The P-47 Thunderbolt was the opposite. Huge, powerful, and built like an armored vehicle in the sky. Howard preferred the Jug, valuing its tough construction and heavy armament. Its fatal shortcoming was range. It couldn't escort bombers deep into Germany, leaving them vulnerable when protection mattered most. As Howard bluntly put it, all the German fighters had to do was wait until the last escort fighters turned back and then pounce on the bombers. The losses were catastrophic. Missions such as the one over Schweinfurt and Regensburg cost the 8th Air Force many heavy bombers. Change was necessary. In 1943, Howard was promoted to major and given command of the 356th Fighter Squadron, 354th Fighter Group in England, a posting that would alter his career. Importantly, his unit would be among the first to operate an airplane that transformed the air war over Europe. The North American P-51B Mustang delivered everything Howard had hoped for. He bragged that all the advanced rumors of the P-51's excellence proved true. It was a fighter pilot's dream. The Mustang's secret was its Packard VI 1650 engine, a license-built Rolls-Royce Merlin variant. This liquid-cooled V12 produced roughly 1,380 to 1,490 horsepower and turned a 4-bladed Hamilton standard propeller, converting power into efficient thrust. At about 32 feet long with a 37-foot wingspan, the Mustang matched other single-engine fighters in size, but its empty weight of 6,985 lb and maximum gross of 11,800 lb reflected the fuel capacity and reinforced structure needed for long-range work. Its performance was striking. A cruising speed near 362 mph and a top speed up to 439 mph at 25,000 ft, with a service ceiling around 41,900 after combat radius of roughly 755 miles on internal fuel, stretching past 880 miles with drop tanks. Finally, let escort fighters stay with the bombers. Armament of 4 wing-mounted 50 caliber Brownings, with heavy ammunition loads, delivered brutal firepower while preserving balance and handling. Howard named his Mustang Ding Hao, Mandarin for very good, and adorned the nose with his victory marks. The airplane became a reflection of him, blending his Chinese roots with American combativeness. Howard later summarized the Mustang's only real limit. The only limitation of the P-51, if you could call it one, was the pilot. But succeeding over Europe required more than individual skill. It demanded new team tactics. The freewheeling independence that served the Flying Tigers in Asia would not survive over Germany, where Luftwaffe pilots flew disciplined formations on home turf. Howard drilled his pilots in the lesson that, if you're out hound-dogging it alone, you're asking for it because the formation of Me-109s who've spotted you from above will certainly make mincemeat of you. The 354th trained relentlessly to counter. Luftwaffe doctrine, climbing to 22,000 ft, joining bomber streams, and holding tight formation across hostile skies. That meant careful fuel management, precise navigation, and flying wingtip to wingtip for hours in freezing air. Escorts had to remain close enough to deter, but agile enough to fight. On a December 20, 1943 escort over Bremen, Howard squared off with the Messerschmitt Bf 109, the backbone of German fighter defenses and one of history's most effective combat aircraft. The angular, aggressive Bf 109 had earned its reputation over 3 years of action in Spain, Poland, France, Britain, and Russia. Using the Mustang's superior high-altitude capability and his seasoned combat instincts, Howard climbed hard into the sun, rolled inverted, and dived onto the German fighter from above. Closing rapidly, he lined up the guns and fired. A blast of .50 caliber rounds ripped into the enemy. Flames poured from its cowling as it spun down and crashed into the fields. Howard's first victory in Europe would be the first of many. January 11, 1944 opened cold and overcast across England, conditions that should have kept every aircraft grounded. But the strategic bombing campaign could not be postponed. Operation Argument was enormous in scope. 525 B-17 Flying Fortresses and 138 B-24 Liberators dispatched to hit aviation targets near Oschersleben and Halberstadt, with primary aims of crippling Messerschmitt Bf 110 production and the Junkers facilities turning out U-88 wings. Success would set back German fighter output by months before the planned invasion. Planners knew the price would be steep. German radar was advanced, and the Luftwaffe had stockpiled fighters to defend against just such raids. Intelligence estimated up to 500 enemy fighters might scramble to intercept. The escort scheme was intricate. P-47 Thunderbolts would provide the initial screen. P-51 Mustangs, including Howard's flight, would cover the target zone, and fresh P-47s would meet the formation for the return. As with many elaborate plans, it began to unravel almost immediately. Worsening weather forced some P-47 units to turn back, leaving gaps German controllers quickly exploited. Major Howard led the 356th P-51s toward the rendezvous, aware the mission had escalated in danger. Enemy radar had already trailed the bomber streams, and Luftwaffe fields across northwestern Germany were launching everything available. Howard later described reaching the stream to find it under furious assault by dozens of enemy fighters. What had left England in tight practice formations was now breaking apart. Dogfights scattered over miles. B-17s plodded onward, their 4 engines laboring to keep formation while gunners swept the skies from turret to turret, searching for diving shadows. German fighters struck in relentless, coordinated waves, attacking from every vector with tactics honed by long combat experience. Howard saw instantly that keeping his entire squadron intact would be pointless. He split his force, sending 2 squadron leaders to shield middle and rear elements while he pushed forward toward the most endangered targets. The lead bombers, where navigators and bombardiers crucial to the mission were almost undefended. The scene was harrowing. Dozens of B-17s, each carrying 10-man crews on a run deep into enemy territory, were being battered. Designed to absorb punishment and keep flying, they became slow-moving targets drenched in tracer streams and cannon bursts. With no escape and no time to hesitate, Howard dove in, zeroing on the most immediate danger. His first clash came fast. A Messerschmitt Bf-110, a twin-engined heavy fighter purpose-built to attack bomber formations, was closing for a frontal strike. Larger and more heavily armed than single-engine fighters, the Bf-110 traded maneuverability for firepower and a two-man crew that improved situational awareness. Against bombers, it was a feared weapon, though not invulnerable. Howard said he waited until the Bf-110's wings filled his gun sight, then let loose a 4-second burst. Concentrated .50 caliber rounds found their mark. Smoke erupted, and the heavy fighter rolled into a spiraling dive as its wings failed under stress. Victory separated Howard from his formation. When he searched for his wingman, he found himself alone. The swirling melee had dispersed aircraft across vast swaths of sky. Most pilots would have climbed away to rejoin friendly forces, but Howard chose otherwise. Turning back toward the damaged bombers, he saw an astonishing sight. More than 30 German fighters converging from every quarter. The air was a tapestry of tracer streams and blasts, as B-17 crews fought for survival against a brutal, overwhelming onslaught. A fellow pilot later observed that single fighters sometimes attacked small groups, but a lone fighter deliberately engaging 30-plus enemies without the advantage of height or surprise was nearly unheard of. That reality did not deter Howard. He fixed on a Bf-109 weaving through the bomber stream and fired a precise burst that ripped through its wing, sending it into a lethal spiral. As he pulled up, an FW-190 screamed across his path with guns blazing. Howard pressed his attack until smoke boiled from its engine, and the enemy pilot scrambled out, battling the slipstream before his parachute opened. Howard recalled that more Bf-109s kept arriving. One after another, each engagement a winner-take-all duel. The 109s dove from above to gain speed and strike the bombers' vulnerable undersides, and the fighting unfolded as a deadly chess match in the skies. Howard anticipated their moves, cutting across their dive paths and forcing attackers into tight turning fights, where the Mustang's superior maneuverability gave him the advantage. With each intercepted pass, he whittled away at the swarm and stayed close to the bombers. The strain of non-stop combat told. 3 of Howard's 4 guns jammed under extreme G-loads during violent maneuvers, leaving him with a single working weapon, and his fuel state dropped to dangerously low levels. Even so, he would not abandon the formation. When continued gunnery was impossible, he improvised, showing both ingenuity and courage. A twin-engined Junkers Ju-88 approached the stream. The Ju-88 had been used by the Luftwaffe as a bomber, a heavy fighter, a reconnaissance plane, and an anti-ship attacker. In this role, it could engage bombers from standoff ranges, making interception tricky. Howard later said he decided to bluff, feinting aggressively toward the bomber to frighten the Ju-88 crew into breaking off. His repeated threatening feints, fast dives, and sudden veers convinced the crew they faced a larger or more dangerous opponent, and they abandoned their attack. Using a mix of his remaining ammunition and the Mustang's intimidating presence, Howard turned psychological pressure into protection. From the B-17's vantage, the sight was extraordinary. One P-51 darting among enemy fighters, disrupting attack after attack in ways that defied common sense and survival instinct. Brigadier General Robert F. Travis, who led the bomber formation, later said, "He was all over the wing, across it, and around it. For sheer determination and guts, it was the greatest exhibition I'd ever seen. It was a case of one lone American against what seemed to be the entire Luftwaffe." For roughly 30 minutes, Howard waged what many historians call the most remarkable single-handed aerial fight of the war, drawing on every lesson he had learned in China and every capability of his Mustang to oppose a force that should have crushed him in moments. His tactics shifted with the situation. He throttled back to stay with the lumbering bombers when needed, close enough to defend but far enough to avoid their defensive fire. When attackers closed, he accelerated and used aggressive maneuvering to exploit the Mustang's performance. The effect was more than ballistics. German pilots, expecting scattered, helpless bomber streams, encountered a fighter seemingly everywhere at once, constantly interrupting attacks before they formed. As the Luftwaffe fighters peeled away to refuel and rearm, Howard found the sky suddenly empty of the hundreds of aircraft that had filled it minutes before. The battered bomber stream limped home intact because of his unprecedented defense. Howard rounded up 3 stray P-51s and led them back to RAF Bodney. Colonel Harold Bowman of the 401st Bomb Group remembered the debrief room buzzing with high-pitched excitement when the bomber crews landed. Howard's Mustang bore a single bullet hole. Either miraculous luck, exceptional airmanship, or something more. Debriefings produced 16 independent accounts from bomber crews confirming the lone P-51's actions. Every story corroborated the impossible. One fighter had defended an entire bomber force against overwhelming odds for more than half an hour. Bowman later asked, "Who was that Mustang pilot who took on the German Air Force single-handed and saved our 401st Bomb Group from disaster?" Gun camera film later verified Howard's identity and deeds. Official records credited him with 4 aerial victories from that engagement, but the numbers scarcely captured the event's scale. In the days that followed, Oschersleben turned Howard into an international figure. A London press conference drew reporters including Walter Cronkite and Andy Rooney, who struggled to take in the full magnitude of what he had done. When asked why he risked his life against such odds, Howard's simple answer became famous. "I've seen my duty, and I've done it." The line ran around the world, embodying his modesty and character. A man who performed an extraordinary act and described it as simply doing his duty. The New York Times reported on January 19, 1944, Major James H. Howard was identified today as the lone United States fighter pilot who for more than 30 minutes fought off about 30 German fighters. Honors followed quickly. Howard was promoted to lieutenant colonel in February 1944 and, on June 5, 1944, one day before the Normandy invasion, Lieutenant General Karl Spaatz presented him with the Medal of Honor. He was the only fighter pilot in the European theater to receive that distinction during World War II. Howard returned to combat after the award, flying many more missions and helping to plan close air support for D-Day. His final recorded victories included another Messerschmitt Bf-110 over Oschersleben on January 30, 1944, and an FW-190 on his birthday, April 8. He rose to colonel in January 1945, transferred into the newly formed U.S. Air Force in 1947, became a brigadier general in the Air Force Reserve in 1948, and retired in 1966. In civilian life, he managed Lambert Field in St. Louis, served as director of aeronautics, and founded Howard Research, a systems engineering firm later sold to Control Data Corporation. In 1991, Howard published Roar of the Tiger, offering first-hand accounts of pivotal air battles for later generations. Reflecting on conflict, he wrote, "War is not a feast of excitement, but a series of cruel episodes that do not always end in glory." In 1994, Pinellas County declared General Howard Day. Permanent exhibits at St. Petersburg Clearwater International Airport and at John Burroughs School commemorate him, and Howard Avenue in Myrtle Beach carries his name. He made his final public appearance on January 27, 1995, and died on March 18, 1995, at age 81. He was laid to rest at Arlington National Cemetery. Major Allison C. Brooks, the 401st mission leader, called him a one-man Air Force, and broadcaster Andy Rooney described the incident as the greatest fighter pilot's